Sangye Churdan Soki Chognam La Changchu Bardu Dadi Kyab Suchi Dagi Chinyan Gi Pesonam Ki Rola Penchu Sangye Drupal Shuk Sangye Churdan Soki Chognam La Changchu Bardu Dadi Kyab Suchi Dagi Chinyan Gi Pesonam Ki Rola Penchu Sangye Drupal Shuk Sangye Churdan Soki Chognam La Changchu Bardu Dadi Kyab Suchi Dagi Chunyin Gi Pe Sonam Gi Drola Penchir Sangye Drupal Shu.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thanks, Bob. Happy New Year. And just a couple of minutes meditation on the breath. Kind of get our mind a little calm and centered. So I think the purpose of my life is to lead all sentient beings from suffering to enlightenment. Therefore, I'm going to dedicate my life this year, this month, this week, this day, particularly this session, to practicing Dharma in order to reach enlightenment. For the sake of all sentient beings. reaching enlightenment depends upon understanding, studying, understanding, thinking about, meditating on, realizing all the steps of the path to enlightenment, particularly the Bodhisattva path. Therefore, I'm going to study the teachings on the Bodhisattva vows, which are the essence of the Bodhisattva's practice and essential for reaching enlightenment. So I think, okay, this is the year I reach enlightenment. And good luck with that. Still, good intention. In answer to Bob's question about a longish teaching on regret, it's in here. It's in Lama Zopa Rinpoche's commentary, which you probably don't have the book, but you have the link. It's online. It's on the lamyeshi.com website. Lama Zopa Rinpoche's commentary on Ganden Lakema. It's called The Power of Repentance. Several pages, like I said, it's one of the more extensive teachings on the topic I've seen. He talks about it himself, of course, and then quotes Pabonka Rinpoche's method of generating repentance, and quotes from the Essence of Nectar or Essential Nectar, which is a very important lamrim text published by Wisdom with Geshe Rabden's commentary, Essential Nectar. In fact, when Lama Zopa Rinpoche stopped using his own textbook, Wish Fulfilling Golden Sun, at the Kopan courses, for a while there anyway, he was using, which a lot of which was based on Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand. Then I think he started referring more to Essential Nectar by Yeshe Tsondru. So so he quotes that text, and there are several closely typed pages on repentance. So if you want to know more about the topic, check that out. So what we were doing last time was looking at this teaching by Geshe Tashi Tsering on the Bodhisattva vows, remember? So you probably have the link, you should have the link to that in the chat if from before or again now. And also, we started by looking at the FPMT little booklet on the Bodhisattva vows. Then I mentioned Geshe Solam Rinpoche's commentary on the Bodhisattva vows, based on Chandra Gomin's 20 verses. So that's an excellent book. And then I remembered this one too, published by Wisdom many years ago, well, in the 90s. When was it? It was 96. That was the year I left Wisdom. So this is Dujal Rinpoche's commentary on the three vows, Pratimoksha, Bodhisattva, and Tantric vows. So there's a very interesting section on the Bodhisattva vows, which approaches it a little differently from some of these other books. And again, it also the explanation of the Pratimoksha vows and the Tantric vows. So that's an excellent book. And then we mentioned a couple of other books which I went ahead and got. I don't know if I'll ever read them, but there's this Shantideva's other book, the Compendium of the Training Anthology, or Compendium of Discipline, whatever you want to call it, Shiksha Samuchaya. So that's Shantideva's other book. And so I'm going to look forward to dipping into that. And then I also got Art Engel's Bodhisattva Bhumi translation, which Arya Sanga's Bodhisattva Bhumi. So this is one section of a much longer work called the Yogacara Bhumi Shastra, and which I didn't realize till I read His Holiness's foreword here. So I don't know how much of the rest of that text, but that's like, must be an amazingly, which is a really long text. I mean, I think this, the Bodhisattva Bhumi, the Bodhisattva Path to Enlightenment, First Enlightenment, this is the largest section of that Yogacara text by a Sangha. But yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into this a bit too. So, you know, so much to read, so little time. And remember, we're doing this because it's we're up to the part in Asanga's The Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment, where he talked about preparing for the Bodhisattva vows. So we looked at the vows and the root vows, and then Geshe Tashi's Tsering preamble, the intention for taking the vows, the preparation, the commitment. We talked about shamelessness, consideration, lack of consideration for others. And then the three ways, the last thing we did was 3 ways of practicing the vows. So restraining oneself from harmful deeds. This is basically the essential way to practice perfection of morality. Restraining oneself from negative actions, accumulating wholesome deeds, practicing, creating positive karma, and working for the benefit of others. So that's, as His Holiness often says, if you wanted to sum up Buddhist practice in a short phrase, it'd be, if you can't help others, at least don't harm them. So, that's a great slogan for our life, really. That, of course, ideally we should be working for the benefit of others, but if that's too much, then at least we should refrain from giving others harm. So that's the whole of Dharma practice, really. So I think we'll look at Geshe Tashi's commentary, explanation of the 18 root vows. I don't think we have time to go through the 46 auxiliary vows. You should study those yourself. But if you've taken the Bodhisattva vows, it's good to renew them, refresh them, restore them frequently. And if you haven't taken the Bodhisattva vows from a qualified teacher, then you should ask your teacher to give them to you, or find a teacher with whom you feel comfortable establishing a guru-disciple relationship. Find a teacher giving the vows and take them, because it's really important to get an imprint, at least, of these vows in this life, so that you create connection to meet the Mahayana teachings in future lives. So Geshe Tashi says, with the Bodhisattva vows, there are 18 root downfalls or infractions and 46 secondary infractions. The 46 are broken up into 6 groups, depending on the 6 perfections they relate to. So don't worry if this seems like the longest list yet. Well, of all the vows, the longest list is the 253 vows of a fully ordained monk, or 364 vows of a fully ordained nun. But those don't pertain to us. So the other pratimoksha vows and bodhisattva vows and the tantric vows, the list of 46 is the longest. But we're not going to do those. So the first root vow is praising oneself and belittling others. So that happens all the time. Of course, we've had recently 4 years of that, but praising oneself has nothing to do with self-confidence. From the Buddhist perspective, we have to have self-confidence. Without it, we could not keep the vows, because lacking self-confidence means we're more likely to break them. In this particular context, it is praising oneself with a self-centered mind in order to increase our self-importance. So remember, the essence of the pratimoksha vows is a renunciation of samsara. So those individual liberation vows are to help us turn away from the from samsaric pleasure and samsaric happiness, and to renounce samsara, to stop creating negative karma, to purify negative karma created, to create positive karma, and to attain freedom from cyclic existence. The essence of the bodhisattva vows is to abandon or overcome self-cherishing, putting our own happiness ahead of the happiness of others. So these vows are to help us do that. And the essence of the essence or spirit of the tantric vows is to overcome a dualistic view. From the Buddhist, and particularly from the Mahayana point of view, this is wrong, praising ourselves with a self-centered mind. We must also look at belittling or criticizing others within the entire Buddhist context. One of the vows of a fully ordained monk is to tell another monk when you've seen him break a vow. If you don't, you have broken a vow. In that context, it's not criticizing. There's nothing wrong with pointing out somebody's fault. Of course, it depends how you do it and the mind with which you do it. So again, we need to look at belittling or criticizing others in the context of self-interest. So when we meditate on these vows and think about it, we, try to recall instances of doing these things ourselves and see what the circumstances were, what caused us to do that, the mind with which we did it. It's much easier to see others doing this in some ways than ourselves. The important thing is to, self-reflect and be very honest with ourselves about our own shortcomings, and then, strengthen our determination not to do it in the future. We can also see this in the context of the 8 worldly dharmas, of being attached to praise and having aversion to criticism, and being attached to having a good reputation and having aversion to, notoriety. So there was a little phrase that Lama Zopa Rinpoche used to use in the Kopan courses when he's talking about the 8 worldly dharmas. He may have been quoting a text or somebody saying, we have attachment to food, clothing, and reputation. And he'd say that, attachment to food and clothing are relatively easy to give up, but attachment to reputation, to being thought, to having others think well of us, that's much harder to give up. And, as I mentioned before about Geshe Ben Kungel, he used to do these, whenever he caught himself doing a negative action, he would announce it publicly, sort of to sort of stick a dagger into his attachment and self-cherishing. The second one, not sharing with others one's wealth and dharma. It's quite clear that sharing our possessions, knowledge, and understanding is crucial. If we don't share our own possessions and dharma understanding with sentient beings who need it, we're breaking the second root downfall. I particularly think sharing dharma knowledge is very, very important. Although by that, I don't necessarily mean traditional teachings. Giving good advice in a conversation is also sharing your Dharma knowledge. So in 1975, I travelled with Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche on their second world tour. It was quite an extensive one. I've talked about it before, I'm sure. And we were on the road for nearly 9 months and went all, circumambulated the globe. And the Lamas gave teachings all over the place. And quite a few new centres started after that. And the year before, when a bunch of us had become ordained as monks and nuns in Bodh Gaya in 74, His Holiness gave a commentary on the 37 practices of Bodhisattva. And someone had transcribed the English, the translation of those teachings. I had a copy of that. And then Lama Yeshe said that when we were in Sydney, you know, I mean, all the teachings were by the Lamas, obviously. And I was just kind of the roadie. But Lama Yeshe said there was a 10-day course and that I should teach it. So I'd barely been, it was just over, it was about 2.5 years since I'd met the Lamas and taken my first teaching. So I felt very unprepared. But Lama said, look, you know more than these people who've never come to teachings or have had very few teachings. You know, you've had, even in that short time, you've had a lot more. So you have something to share. So I had His Holiness's commentary to refer to, and we transcribed Lama Zopa Rinpoche's teachings from the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th Copan courses. So I had 2 or 3 of those thick transcripts. So, I mean, all I could do was in the breaks between the sessions, I just go back to my room and, you know, read what Lama Zopa Rinpoche had said about the next topic, and then try and sort of parrot that in the next session. So somehow we got through it. But so there were 2 things, you know. One, of course, if, you know, Lama Yeshe told me to do it, so there was no question I had to do it. And but the second was there's this commitment that if you're asked to explain the Dhamma or give teachings, then you should do it. And or even if you're not asked, if you, like Geshe-la says, if just giving good advice in a conversation, you know, based on your Dhamma understanding is fulfilling this vow. The third one is not forgiving even when others apologize. So if someone has done something to us, our family or friends, out of ignorance or greed or some negative emotion, and they've acknowledged their action in some way, not to accept their apology is breaking this vow. We should not ignore or reject their attempt to explain. Of course, the incident might still be too painful, or they might still be evasive or dishonest, and we might need more detail to be convinced. Such situations are rarely simple, but there must be some kind of receptiveness on our part. An immediate blind rejection invariably sets up a chain reaction, which is very destructive. By trying to be receptive in some way, there is the possibility of healing the damage. To stay open means to start to understand their point of view, whereas to fully understand is to fully forgive. I would say that if your initial response is to not immediately reject, then you are not breaking the vow. Understanding will come gradually. Therefore, to prevent the third downfall from happening, we must be mindful all the time when such things happen within ourselves or within our community or family. So, you know, recently the Archbishop Desmond Tutu died, didn't he? And he, one of his great actions in South Africa was to set up this Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which, you know, after everything that had been done during the apartheid era, it was like really quite an amazing turning of the cheek, you know. And recently, so Donald Trump Jr. said, you know, what's turning the other cheek gotten for us? It's not quite the right attitude. Anyway. The fourth one, doubting and denying the doctrine of the great vehicle, Mahayana. Denying the teachings of the Mahayana is saying that they are wrong in some way. When we were on this, when I was on this trip with the Lamas, from Kopan we went to Darjeeling, to the monastery where the Lamas, Dhamma Geshe Rinpoche's monastery, where the Lamas met their first Western student, Zena, to collect a trunk of Lama Zopa Rinpoche's stuff that had been left there. And it contained all sorts of beautiful brocade robes and kind of stuff according to his status as a tulku. There may have been other reasons that I wasn't aware of, but anyway, first we went there, and then we went to Dharamsala, and then we started the actual world tour in Thailand, in Bangkok. And there are a couple of Tibetan Lamas there that His Holiness had sent to live with the Theravadan monks, and I'm not quite sure what their mission was exactly. Geshe Tenge, who finished up becoming later the resident teacher at Ajahn Yogin Institute in France, and Zazab Tulku, who became Geshe Lodin's interpreter, who was the first interpreter to go with a Geshe to FPMT Center. They went to Chenrezig Institute in 76. And then Zazab Tulku, after that 3 years, Zazab Tulku started his own organization. His main centers in Canada. And as you know, Lama Yeshe was very outgoing and always, not that often, but sometimes hugging people, but always shaking their hand and everything. So when students came to meet Lama Yeshe, and he would shake their hands, So when the women students or people, and everyone was always attracted to Lama, he'd shake their hands. People who were the lay Theravada people and the monks were horrified that this monk is touching women, because there's a very strict Vinaya rule that monks don't touch women. I mean, there are all kinds of very, very, very strict rules for the monks, which these days, if you were to follow them to the letter, I mean, it's basically impossible. And I remember there were, when the first Western monks were ordained in the Theravada tradition, and they were trying to emulate the Theravada monks, following the rules to the letter, not allowed to handle money, and you're not allowed to sleep under the same roof as a woman. So so often they had to travel with a companion who would pay their bus fare, or when they went home to visit their family, they weren't allowed to sleep in the same house as their mother, because it's kind of, you can see the purpose, but quite difficult to follow. But certainly, and in Thailand, you'd hear stories of monks, and some of them seemed to me a little arrogant, you know, but they were, you know, they were revered, and you know, they had to go out in the morning on their alms round and be given food like that, and then take it back to the monastery. And most of them lived in monasteries. There were some forest monks who spent a lot of time in meditation. I don't know whether they went on alms rounds or how they got their food, but most of the monks had to go. You know, and that was one of the first things that I saw when I went to Thailand before I got really interested in Buddhism was, you know, you see a lot of temples and Buddha statues, and then you see monks going on their alms round every morning. So there are a lot of external manifestations of Buddhism that got me to read my first book. But so the monks would walk down the sidewalk, and then, you know, women would jump off into the gutter to avoid touching the monk as they walked past, you know, things like that, you know. So they were kind of shocked to see Lama Yeshe so friendly with women, shaking their hands and everything. And, you know, they really, a lot of them criticized, you know, what kind of Buddhism is this, you know? This is not Buddhism. So that's kind of breaking this vow, you know. There have been many books and theories which say things such as bodhicitta cannot grow in an individual continuum, or the Prajnaparamita Sutras are not the teachings of the Buddha. Actually, that is wrong. So in the lamrim, you know, there are these four main headings of the lamrim, you know, the preeminent qualities of the author, which talks about Atisha, how he was qualified to write this book. There's the second section about, you know, the preeminent qualities of the lamrim teaching, how it's like this really incredible, amazing presentation of the Buddha's teaching, has all these benefits. Then the third one is how to listen and teach, and then the fourth one is how the disciples are led on the path. So one of the teachings in the second section about the qualities of the lamrim is, by understanding the lamrim, we see how all the Buddha's teachings are parts of one whole. And you can't criticize this one or that one, because they all form one sort of coherent entity. And to denigrate any of the teachings of the Buddha, you know, does it say it's worse than destroying all the stupas on earth? Something like that. So by understanding the lamrim, it prevents us from creating that extremely heavy negative karma of disparaging any of the Buddha's teachings. So, you know, there are as Geshe-la says, you know, followers of the Theravada, Hinayana tradition, who say that the Mahayana teachings, you know, they're a later fabrication. They're not really the teachings of the Buddha. You know, the stuff made up by Nagarjuna or somebody, you know, and you can't, you know, and they don't teach bodhicitta. You know, I told you the story, I'm sure more than once, about Prakantipalo, the Theravada monk who came to the Lama's first teaching in Australia and then criticized Rinpoche to Lama Yeshe, saying this young monk, he talks too much about bodhicitta. And then, you know, fast forward 2 or 3 decades, and he's founded a centre in Australia called the Bodhicitta Centre. So, you know, minds can change.
Nick, I have a question.
He passed away recently. What?
So these are if you have taken the bodhisattva vow. So it's not saying that if you haven't taken them, it's not negative to do the action, but it's less negative.
yeah, there are two kinds of negativity. You know, there's a natural negativity, like killing. You know, whether you're taking a vow not to kill or not, it's negative. And then there are natural negativities, and there are sort of prescribed negativities. I forget the term, where it's not negative. You know, if you're a Theravada monk, you're taking a vow not to touch women, it's negative if you touch women. And there's no such thing as the bodhicitta exception, you know, like in the Mahayana. Well, we'll come to that vow in a minute, but if you haven't taken a vow not to touch women or men, you can touch them, you know, depending on your motivation, of course, you know, it can still be negative. But or to handle money, you know, if you're taking a vow not to handle money, then, and you handle money, you're breaking the vow. But it's not a natural negativity. You know, if you handle money, if you haven't taken the vow, it's just, you see what I mean? So criticizing, you know, this is whether you've taken a vow not to disparage the Mahayana or not. If you do it, it's still negative. If you've taken the vow not to do it and you do it, it's kind of double negative. Like, you know, double stuffed Oreo.
What about the Dalai Lama's teaching that you should not accept the Buddha's words on face value or out of faith, but rather examine them, test them, and only then, upon convincing yourself that they're correct, believe them? Or the idea of the structure of the cosmology of Sumeru and these other things, where the Dalai Lama says we now accept the scientific explanation for the structure of the universe. Would this not be on the face of it a violation of or a criticism of the Buddha's teaching? Or does this first thing I said allow that all to happen despite this vow?
Well, there are two parts to what you just said. The first is, you know, not accepting something the first time you hear it isn't disparaging it or denying it. It's saying, "Oh, I don't know," you know, and then having doubt and then examining your doubt. So that's, you know, if that's not your approach, if you hear something and you just reject it out of hand and don't even look into it, which is not what His Holiness is saying you should do, then that's negative. It's going to harm you. You know, that's one of even the 10 non-virtues. You know, it's generating a wrong view. So, but that's not what His Holiness is saying. He's saying, and what the Buddha himself said. You know, just what I teach is true, but don't accept it just because I said so. You have to examine it. So examining it isn't the same as rejecting it. So that's what this is talking about. The second part about you know, the Mount Meru and His Holiness saying that, you know, scientific, you know, empirical knowledge kind of trumps traditional teachings, then we also have to remember that we need to look at the Buddha's teachings. There are definitive teachings and interpretive teachings, and we have to look at the context in which they were given. So, you know, 2,500 years ago, it may have been skillful means to present the structure of the cosmos in that way, because that's all people could understand. And if it was presented, I don't know, who was it, Copernicus or something? I don't know. But, you know, you know, the planets rotate around the sun and the earth is round and all this stuff. You know, might have been too much for people to comprehend at that time, and they would have generated a negative view. So we also have to look at the context in which the teachings were given. And again, it's not really saying they were wrong, but or that, you know, the Buddha was lying, but you just have to look at the context. I don't know, have I wormed my way out of that one? Or not convinced, Bill?
I think if the entire cosmology is agreed to be changed, you can wheedle all you want, but or say that the Buddha was omniscient then and knew the current cosmology or even a better one and wasn't able to explain it or wasn't willing to explain it. So I mean, the idea of ancient progress, I think, is a part of it, and I think to some extent intractable positions are almost always subject to question and to change.
I think anyway, what this is talking about really is a kind of an active denial and disparagement. I don't think His Holiness is saying that science trumps certain traditional teaching is necessarily this, you know. Anyway, just go on. At this stage, because of our strong and spontaneous self-centered mind, caring totally for others is not spontaneous, but it is possible. Some of these theories utterly refute that. But if the self-centered attitude has been developed by habituating ourselves to it, why can't the other mind also be developed like that? You know, why can't we make cherishing others eventually as spontaneous as cherishing ourselves is at the moment? Saying bodhicitta cannot grow in an individual continuum is very misleading. Selflessness is possible. The best thing we can do is to investigate through our own experience whether these teachings are possible or not. If we really trace back to the original Buddha's teaching on selflessness, there is no doubt that the Buddha taught it. The teachings on emptiness are an extension of the teachings on selflessness from the Four Noble Truths. We are born as human beings and we have the capability to learn. It is therefore very important at this stage not to rush and make wrong decisions or wrong judgments. It's very dangerous to say that the great vehicle or Mahayana teachings are not the Buddha's teachings, or that they won't lead to full enlightenment, or that those who follow the teachings won't develop great bodhicitta. Although there are many ups and downs in our lives, in general, we're in a very fortunate situation and have the ability to see right from wrong. To spoil this opportunity through some emotional reaction would be tragic. When will we ever get the opportunity again? According to Mahayana Buddhism, within the 1,000 Buddhas of this fortunate eon, very few will give Mahayana teachings. Even if we are born as a human being in our next life, it will probably be very difficult to meet these kind of circumstances again. I'm not saying that you should just accept all this. What I'm asking is that you don't reject this because you might have read a few persuasive books or heard a charismatic teacher refuting the Mahayana teachings. Investigate for yourself. Don't accept immediately, but don't reject immediately either. This is so important. To block off this crucial area of investigation is therefore a downfall. So, you know, just to reiterate what Geshe-la is saying here is, I'm reading through this. It's, you know, just reading through it like this, you're hearing it, it's, especially if you don't have it in front of you, it's sometimes a little difficult to remember, you know, what I just read, or if you're thinking about, what was that? Thinking about something that was just said, then you miss what follows. So that's why it's important to go over these teachings again. And as Lama Zopa Rinpoche always says, you know, when you're reading something, don't just read it in order to get to the end, but read it in order to really understand, you know. So read. So I, you know, and he says you can read through. So you could read through this, for example, this teaching of Geshe Tashi Tsering on the Bodhisattva vows. You can read the whole thing through just to get an idea of the whole, you know, what the whole thing contains, but then go back and read it slowly, sentence by sentence. And as Rinpoche says, yeah, read and think, read and think, read and think. So there's this thing called the Four Alliances, remember? I don't know if I can remember them. When relying on the teacher, don't rely on the teacher's appearance and charisma, but rely on what the teacher says. And when relying on what the teacher says, don't just rely on the words, but the meaning. And when relying on the meaning, don't rely on the conventional meaning, but on the ultimate meaning. And when relying on the ultimate meaning, don't rely on the intellectual understanding, but rely on the realization of it. Four alliances. So, so that when we read something, you know, you don't think, oh, this is well written or this is badly written. What does this mean? And what does this mean conventionally? What does it mean ultimately? And then ultimately, we have to meditate on it to attain a realization of the meaning. So if we were to do that while we're going through this teaching now, you know, we'd never get anywhere. So this is kind of like a read through. And then if you want to understand it better, you need to go through and read it again and slowly and think about it, each point, and meditate on it, and, you know, relate it to your own experience to see if the teaching's internally consistent. You know, does it accord with your experience? Does it is it correct in relation to other Buddhist teachings that you've heard? You know, think about things like in that way. I think there's another point there, I forget. So we need to move on. 5, taking offerings intended for the 3 jewels. So, you know, taking things off the altar or whatever. Taking offerings intended for Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha is considered a root downfall. Here, the Buddha means any Buddha image, as well as the actual Buddha himself. At Jamyang, you know, so he's, Geshe-la was Geshe Tashi Tsering. He he was a resident teacher at Jamyang Buddhist Center in London for many years. And then, I don't know, a couple of years ago, he was appointed as abbot of Seramay Monastery. So now he's in India being the abbot of Seramay. So Seramay was Dipamkara Rinpoche's monastery. He was in Seramay. So, but you can say at Kurukulla, we make many offerings to the big Buddha statue in the main Gompa. Why is it so bad if you steal something from a statue? It's just a statue. It was built out of plaster. Well, we had ours cast in metal in Nepal or India. We all know that, but still, it's more than that. Within the statue are many, many mantras, and there have been, been so many strong prayers made to the statue. So this is no longer an object made by Peter. He's talking about Peter Griffin, the artist who made the Buddha statue at the London Centre. Peter and his wife Denise are incredible artists and sculptors, and they made so many statues and that have had tsatsa molds cast from them. So many of the tsatsas we see around the FPMT are made from molds that were made from statues and carved by Peter and Denise. And there's incredible, I don't know if you've seen our book, Abiding in the Retreat, Lama Zopa Rinpoche's commentary on the Nyungne practice. There's a photo of the Thousand Arm Chenrezig at the Amitabha Buddhist Center in Singapore. That was made by, I think mainly by Denise, but they've made many incredible statues, and they're wonderful artists. And so Geshe-la, he is talking about the Buddha statue at the London Centre made by Peter. After he completed it, many great masters, such as Holiness Dalai Lama, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, Dhamma Locha Rinpoche, have blessed it. And many people with sincere conviction have made prayers in front of it. It is not just an image, it's an inspiration. And for a Buddhist practitioner, it really represents the Buddha. So things offered to the Buddha's image are offered to the Buddha. So, we can say the same about our statues and holy objects on our altar at Kurukulla Center. They were blessed by His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, by Lama Zopa Rinpoche, by Geshe Tsulga, by, so many other lamas, Choden Rinpoche, Keti Sensha Rinpoche. We've had so many great lamas come to Kurukulla Center over the last 20 years. And, Ling Rinpoche, so many lamas. And often Ling Rinpoche was right here, and he blessed our altar. They do the prayer and they throw the rice, so they really kind of consecrate these images and sort of give them a little more juice than just the atoms from which they're made. So and beyond that, as Lama Zopa Rinpoche always says, we need to see all these holy objects as manifestations of our own guru. And that when we make offerings to statues, we're actually making offering to our gurus, our one guru or our 20 gurus, however many gurus we have. And, there are many stories of statues speaking to, realized masters who purified their minds much more than we have to be able to receive actual advice and teachings from statues. So things offered to a Buddha image are offered to the Buddha or to our guru. So, you know, stealing from the guru is kind of the worst thing. It's the same with any holy object, statue, stupa, tanka. It is not as if the objects own the offerings, but although there is no one who says this belongs to me, taking those offerings is the same as stealing from a Buddha or a guru. The offerings have been sincerely offered, so it's very important to learn how to handle those objects with great sensitivity. Remember years ago, as Kopan, as the monastery developed in the 70s, you know, many people used to come and make offerings on the altar, but the gompa was never locked. It was always left unlocked. So, and there are a lot of poor people who lived around, Nepali people who lived around Kopan and didn't understand, didn't have faith in Buddhism, you know, and so Lama always had one of the young monks stay in the gompa overnight to sort of guard the altar, to prevent people really from creating negative karma of stealing from the altar. And one night the monk fell asleep, and then someone came into the gompa, never found out who, and stole some stuff off the altar. And so, you know, he really got, I don't know if he was physically beaten by Lama Yeshe, but he probably got a few swipes. Lama had a mala, which was about 3 times as big as this, you know, and he used to whack the monks over the back with it. That was usually the Lama's main instrument of torture for young monks. Although sometimes Lama would hit the young monks on the head with his thong, with his flip-flop. And the Westerners were like, oh my God, child abuse. But, you know, my first year I went up to Laudo, 73, spent the summer there, and my girlfriend and I, she was a nurse, we took up a whole bunch of medicines and set up a free clinic at Laudo Gompa for that summer. And the Sherpas used to come, and so one day one of the incarnate lamas, actually Charak Lama, there were 3 incarnate lamas at Kopan at that time. Before Yangtze Rinpoche came in 75, there was Tenzin Norbu, or his name was also Thukten Zopa Rinpoche. He was called Thukten Zopa Rinpoche Small, to distinguish him from Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Thukten Zopa Rinpoche Small, and then there was Charak Lama. They were both local from up there, from up near Laudo. And there was Gelug Gyatso Rinpoche. And then Yangtze Rinpoche came for a while. There were 4 of them. So I was in the clinic, such as it was, and then Charak Lama came in, and he had all these welts. Took off his shirt, and he had all these welts on his back. You could see from beads on the mala where Lama Pasang had given him a thrashing, and so I had to treat the wounds. So I don't think Lama beat up. Not sure who the monk was, but I think I remember his name, but I won't send it out to the Akashic record. But it might have been Thupten Tapke. I don't think Lama drew blood, but anyway, he probably never fell asleep on duty again. If he got the job again, I don't know. Then 76, 77, Lama Yeshe sent me to Delhi. I got kicked out of Kopan. I was very comfortable, which might have been the problem, and sent to Delhi to start a center. So it took a couple of years to get it going. But then we got this really nice center, and I bought a set of silver offering bowls from Bodhanath in Kathmandu. You could really get beautiful silver work. They're big bowls, big silver bowls. We had them on the altar, 7 of them. And then one day we came into the Gompa, and someone was emptying the waste paper basket, and it had all this water in it. And then they looked at the altar, and there were only 6 water bowls there. So at some point, presumably some Indian, had snuck into the center and stolen 1 offering bowl, dumped the water in, at least it was in the waste paper basket, right? And disappeared with this silver offering bowl. So not sure where he is now, but probably not in a good place.
The story was in Mexico years ago that if people stole food, the family would not prosecute, or people would not prosecute a person for stealing food or other things they would need for their family, only if they stole something like a water bowl or something of value would they prosecute. And this was viewed also, but even with the water bowl, aren't you violating the rule of generosity when you protect the thing?
No, you're protecting people from the negative karma of stealing from the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. You know, it's anyway, and stealing is a natural negativity. No matter what you steal, even if you steal food, you're creating negative karma. You know, that can be mitigated by the person kind of offering it from their heart. Like, you know, the story that Lama Zopa often tells about Geshe Jumpa Wangdu, the meditator who lived in a small hut in Dharamsala. And he hardly had any possessions, but one of his actual possessions was an alarm clock, the Indian alarm clock. I guess that he used to, I don't know if he used it to wake up to meditate or go to teachings or whatever. But one day he went to teachings and with His Holiness, and then he came back and he found that someone had broken into his, I don't know if broken in or entered his hut and stolen the alarm clock. And he was so happy that he'd been able to benefit the person with the alarm clock, that he was so happy the person got something that he wanted and he dedicated to the benefit of that person. But still, the person stole, still created negative karma. So, you know, you can't, we can't purify others' negative karma just by, you know, offering it to them after the event. Anyways, better go on. So in the monastery, there are vows in the monastic vows too. Handling the monastery's things is a very sensitive issue, not only for those monks who have the responsibility of looking after those things, but also for people coming from outside. Traditionally, Tibetan people are very, very careful. Even when having a cup of tea in a monastery, they pay a lot of attention because the object they are using is really dedicated toward the 3 jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. This is true of any property that belongs to a community, but much more so a spiritual community, such as a monastery or a Dharma center. It's a very sensitive point. When Nagarjuna was asked to become the monk in charge of the monastery property, he completely declined. There's a prayer which he wrote requesting not to be born in charge of a monastery, not to be born in charge in a monastery, because he saw how heavy a downfall it was if that property was mishandled. People contribute things to Dharma centers with a sincere heart, really wishing to help the development of a community. Because places like this are such powerful objects, if we misuse their possessions, we're creating a much heavier negativity than if we misuse a normal person's possessions. And of course, taking without permission is much, much heavier than if someone in charge gives you something and you misuse it. It's the same with taking from the Sangha. Sangha, very strictly speaking, refers to a person who has a direct realization of emptiness, or more generally, to fully ordained monks or nuns. But very loosely speaking, Sangha can refer to people who are practicing the spiritual path. It's very important to know how to use things which belong to that kind of community. You know, I remember, I think Song Rinpoche saying that he's very reluctant to accept even a cup of tea from devotees, because he says it's like drinking, the tea is like drinking molten metal. So if people make you a sincere offering, especially if you're a High Lama or a monk or a Sangha person, you know, as I said, it places a very heavy responsibility on you to practice Dharma and not to you know, cheat that person by misusing their, you know, if you're a monk and someone offers you some money with faith, and then you, I don't know, use the money to buy some porn DVDs, and then you start, as a monk, you start watching porn from the money you bought someone. I mean, that'd be a terrible thing, you know. I mean, you can think of so many different examples, but so Song Rinpoche was emphasizing the importance of when you receive offerings, people, especially if you're, you know, High Lama or just a regular Sangha person, you have to, you have a responsibility to practice Dharma and to use that offering responsibly. So the molten metals question is, you know, one of the hells, you know, the hell beings, they're born on the red hot iron ground and in this, you know, blazing fire and just suffering incredibly with huge, extremely tender bodies. Well, you have the karma not to die, but have to live experiencing the terrible suffering, one of which is having, you know, molten metal poured down your throat. And then, you know, not to expire. I mean, if that happened to us, we would go into shock and die straight away. So it'd be painful for a short time, very short time. But if you don't have the karma to die, you just have to put up with that. It's just unimaginable. You know? So he's Song Rinpoche was referring to that. You know? 6, abandoning the doctrine through sectarianism. So the 6th root vow is, the 6th one is referring to stopping or abandoning the practice of Buddha Dharma, either completely or partly due to misinformation. For example, for people who are practicing the Mahayana path, there's such a strong emphasis on the Mahayana teachings that there's a risk of saying Theravadan teachings are not really important. So this is what I was talking about before. Conversely, if the emphasis is put very strongly on the Theravadan teachings, there's a risk of thinking that Mahayana teachings are not relevant. Of course, there are different emphases, but that does not mean that we should abandon one teaching or the other. They're purely due to an individual's interest and mental dispositions. So, you know, one of when Atisha was invited to Tibet to clarify misconceptions that had crept in over the previous couple of centuries of suppression of the Dharma by King Leng Dharma and perhaps others. One of the serious misconceptions was that if you're practicing sutra, you can't practice tantra. If you're practicing tantra, the sutra teachings are irrelevant. Of course, they're both essential parts of the Mahayana, but there was this dichotomy between sutra and tantra. So the tantric practitioners felt, they were superior to sutra practitioners who didn't know what they were doing, and the sutra practitioners were like tantric, they're just degenerates. So, so that was one of the reasons that Atisha wrote Lamp for the Path, to show the kind of sameness really between sutra and tantra. Lama Tsongkhapa said very clearly in his Lamrim Chenmo, Great Exhibition of Gradual Path of Enlightenment, that a unique feature of the Lamrim is that through studying it, the entire Buddha Dharma can be understood as a spiritual path to achieve Buddhahood. It's one spiritual path. In the earlier stage, the middle and small scope teaching, there is a strong emphasis on the law of cause and effect, the Four Noble Truths, whereas in the great scope, there's much more emphasis on bodhicitta or Mahayana teachings. The entire teaching is given to show a practitioner where to start and where to end. Like the analogy I often use, if you pull one corner of a cloth, the whole cloth moves. So I think this is called the path of the square. I think you understand the point. If you've got a square piece of cloth, you pull one corner, the whole thing moves. You pull one corner, the whole thing moves. To understand bodhicitta, we must understand emptiness and cause and effect. It is so important not to abandon one part of Buddha Dharma just because that is not our main emphasis or because we're following a particular tradition. Of course, different traditions suit different mental dispositions. I'm not advocating mixing everything together. In English, you have an expression, melting pot. That does not work so well in Buddhism. So, and also, we have to look at not just this life, we have to look at our Dharma path as extending over countless lifetimes. So at some point in our Dharma career, we're going to need, Theravadan teachings, Mahayana teachings, we're going to need the Vajrayana, we're going to need it all at some point as we gradually develop. So it's important not to disparage any aspect of the Buddha's teachings, because maybe if we're born into a situation where we really need this particular teaching that we once disparaged, we will not have the karma to meet it, and therefore that we won't be able to fulfill our potential at that particular life or in that particular stage of the particular life. Seven, causing an ordained person to disrobe. Disrobing is breaking an individual liberation vow, but causing someone to disrobe is breaking a bodhisattva vow. I think this really emphasizes how important it is not to see individual liberation vows as inconsequential or inferior to the bodhisattva vows. This kind of thinking is possible and has happened in the past. Because somebody is practicing the bodhisattva path, they might feel that what they're doing is more important than simply observing the lower vows, and that if someone disrobes, it is not so important. It is important, to cause an ordained person to disrobe is a root downfall. You know, if you've taken the bodhisattva vows. So I think, you know, disrobing, you know, as a previous participant in that activity, I don't think when I disrobed as a monk, I did break an individual liberation vow. You know, when you're a monk, there are 4 root vows and then a whole bunch of other vows. You know, if you're a novice, there are 36 vows altogether. If you're a fully ordained monk or nun, as I mentioned before, there are 200-300 vows. But there are 4 root vows. And if you break one of those, then you automatically lose your ordination. So, you know, there's, and, you know, and as with breaking any vow, there are different paths. There's completely breaking it. There are partial breaks and so on and so forth. So I'm not going to get into all that. But, you know, as Geshe-la talked before about the different conditions necessary to break the bodhisattva vows. But generally speaking, you know, if you have sexual intercourse as a monk or nun, you've broken that root vow. So you're no longer a monk or nun. If you steal something of value, you break your ordination. If you lie about your spiritual attainment, you know, I realized emptiness, I've got bodhicitta when you haven't, you know. If you lie about spiritual attainment, you break your vow. And if you create a schism in the Sangha community, you break a root vow. So breaking any of those root vows, you've blown it. That's it. You're no longer a monk and you cannot be reordained in that life. However, if you feel, as I did, that I can no longer really maintain monastic discipline, not to make excuses, but at that point I wasn't in a monastery, I was living in London, running wisdom publications, running a business, not wearing robes, no Sangha support, except Venerable Rowena, which I won't go into, and you know, living with a bunch of lay people in a condemned house, because that's what we could afford. And you get up in the morning and you go to the office, and then you're at home, you go back to this hovel, and you know, your mind starts to become very ordinary. And so, you know, I struggled with it for 3 years actually, before I decided I couldn't, you know, I'd rather be a good lay person than a bad monk. So I don't know if I ever became a good lay person, but I stopped being a bad monk. And so, you know, the way you do it is you respectfully go to an elder. So actually I finished up trying to call Lama Zopa Rinpoche. I was in London, he was in India. And I said, you know, I wanted to talk to him. And actually, the nun, Yeshikado, my ex-girlfriend, happened to be his assistant at the time. So she answered the phone and I spoke to her. And of course, she didn't want me to disrobe either. And so Rinpoche was there, you know, and he said, what does he want? And I said, well, I want to come and see him about returning my ordination. So he wouldn't talk to me. He said, look, if he wants to talk to me, he has to come here. So I had to go to India. So this was May '86. So I thought, okay, I have to go to India. So I flew to Delhi, and as it happened, I arrived day before or the day after. I think I arrived the day after Lama Ursel had arrived from Spain with his mother. He was 15 months old. And he'd been brought to India, to Delhi, in fact, to meet His Holiness. His Holiness could see if he was the incarnation of Lama Yeshe or not. So, so that was kind of nice timing. But Rinpoche was very busy with all that, so I didn't have really time to talk to him. So, you know, I was kind of feeling kind of a little awkward, embarrassed, I guess, or I don't know, uncomfortable about my reason for being there. And when they took Lama Ursel to meet His Holiness, I could have gone along, but I felt kind of a bit shy to join them, so I didn't go, which I regret now. But so then I went to lunch with some Indian friends instead, and so then they met His Holiness, and that happened. Then we had to go to Dharamsala, so I didn't have time to. Rinpoche said, "Well, you wanted to talk to me about something. We can talk in Dharamsala." So then, at that time, you know, Indira Gandhi had just been assassinated. I mean, a couple of years before, but it was still a lot of unrest, and it wasn't that safe to take the train from Delhi to Pathankot. So we got a taxi from Delhi to Dharamsala, which is, you know, the way to go if you can afford it. But you know, so there was Rinpoche and Ursel and his mother Maria and Yeshikado, the nun, and monk Max Redlick, Australian monk, and me. So we all went up in this taxi to Dharamsala, and then we got to McLeod Gardens. I don't know if you've ever been there, but Tushita Centre is kind of up quite a steep hill, and the taxi wouldn't go. So they dropped us at McLeod Gardens with the bus stop, and then we had to go up the hill. So one of my last acts as a monk was to carry Ursel up the hill on my shoulders, which was, you know, and so then we stayed there, and then Lama Zopa Rinpoche did the various tests, you know, showing him Lama Yeshe's Vajra and bell and mala and different things that had belonged to Lama Yeshe. Yeah, mix them up with other ones, and he has to identify this and that. And then we offered him Guru Puja, and I offered him Mandala. Anyway, so all that went down. Then finally I got to meet Lama Zopa, and he said, so what did you want to see me about? And I said, oh, it's so difficult. You know, I've been in London for 3 years, and it's like, you know, really, I'm thinking more and more like less and less like a monk, more and more like a layperson, and I'm just finding it, you know, difficult. And so I'd like to, I'd respectfully like to return my ordination, which is, you know, how you're supposed to do it, either to your teacher or to another senior monk, or even if there's no monk around, you can actually return your ordination to the Buddha on the altar. But you need to do it, you know, respectfully, and not saying the ordination is bullshit and this and that, you know, and casting, you know, like, you know, blaming the ordination for your suffering or whatever. You can't do that. So he says, so he did an observation. He threw the dice, you know, and he kind of looked surprised. And then he did it again, you know. He looked at the way the dice came up. So he'd been doing these divinations for at least nearly 10 years, as far as I could remember. You know, used to spend a lot of time with him in the 70s. And I remember when he started doing these, he'd have a text that he'd consult. When you say you roll the dice and you see the numbers that come up, and there's a deity. So you need to have done this deity retreat. I remember Rinpoche once said he was going to do this retreat, I don't know, in Malaysia for some reason, that anyone who wanted to learn how to do this divination practice would have to come and do the retreat with this particular deity. And once you'd done the retreat and the fire puja, then you had somehow qualified to do this practice of divination, making decisions according to the roll of the dice. And there's a text that he used to consult. So it's kind of a bit like the I Ching or something, I don't know. So at first, he used to roll the dice and then he'd look up this text and then he'd explain what it meant. So then after a while, I guess he'd memorized the text. So then he didn't use the text anymore. So by this time, 9, 10 years later, he just rolled the dice and he knew whether it was good or bad or indifferent or whatever. Sometimes with these divinations, there's also a divination you can do with the mala, where you do the, you visualize the deity, you request the deity, and then you pull the mala through your hands, and you grab then a certain number of beads, and then you count 2 by 2 in like this, 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 and then you're left with 2 or 1 or 3 or 4 or 5 or none. None, 1, 2, 3 or 4, I think it is. So now I can't even remember. But, so the different results are very good, medium good, indifferent, bad, and very bad. So I can't remember the number of beads anymore, but so I was once leading a course in Italy, and it was called one of these courses I was doing in the late 70s for people who were drug dependent. Lama Yeshe sent me to different places to do these courses, and we had a practice doing the seed syllable meditation, sort of generating bliss within your own mind, and the experience of sort of self-generated bliss would lead people to realize that happiness and satisfaction arise from within, and it might make it easier to give up dependence on external substances. That was the theory. What I finished up mainly doing was just doing lamrim teachings, because that's all I knew, and leading this meditation. Anyway, there were all these junkies there at the retreat, and then somebody had their stuff stolen, and they suspected one of the students, but they weren't sure. So one of the monks at the center in Italy said, hey, you can do the mo, no? And I said, no, I can't do the mo. He said, yes, you know how to do it. So you do the mo. So I said, okay. So I did the thing with the mala beads, and I came out and said, well, according to me, this guy didn't do it. The guy they suspected. I said, it's not him. So they went and searched his stuff, and they found that it was him. So then I realized that if I do divination, it's really reliable. Whatever result I come to, if you do the opposite, then it's probably going to be correct. So you can do it either way, I guess. So I think it was probably the last time anyone relied on me for that. So Lama Zopa's throwing the dice, and he's looking very surprised. And really going off on a tangent here. So he said, well, according to my divination, it comes out beneficial for you to change. So that's what he called it. He didn't call it disrobing. He didn't call it stop being a monk. He didn't call it what did one of the ex-monks call it? The lay ordination. He didn't call it that. He said change. So he said, well, according to this, it comes out beneficial for you to change, which means, okay, give back your ordination. So I was like a little surprised because I knew he was kind of really down on that, you know. And, you know, if Lama Yeshe had still been alive, I don't know if I would have been able to do it, to be honest. But anyway, he said, look, you know, and in my mind, there were two things. If I had to remain as a monk, I would have to give up running wisdom publications and go back to India, or go to Nalanda Monastery and like be a monk in a monastic situation. But if I had to remain in London running wisdom publications, it was just, I couldn't do it as a monk, you know, it's too much internal pressure. So, you know, because I was trying to take it seriously. So he says, you know, Lama Yeshe sent you to London to run wisdom publications. So that's, you know, that's what you need to be doing, you know, following Lama's instructions. And, you know, he didn't feel like contradicting them for some reason. So, so he said, so, you know, when you go back, try it again to keep your ordination. But if after a month or so you find it difficult, then go and see Geshe Wangchen. Geshe Namgyal Wangchen was the resident teacher at the Jamyang Buddhist Center, our London center, you know, where Geshe Tashi Tsering became a teacher. You go and see Geshe Wangchen and then, you know, return your ordination to him. So I felt this weight lifted off my shoulders, and I thought, oh, you know, I felt like, okay, I'm off the hook, you know. So, so then I started to get ready to go back to London, and then the next day I got a note from Rinpoche saying, when you do the observation, when you do the mo, you can ask the question, like, should he disrobe or not? You can ask the question two ways. One, what's the best thing for him to do? Or you can ask, what's the best thing for sentient being? What's the best thing for sentient beings for him to do? So I said, so when I checked yesterday, when you were with me, I checked what's the best thing for you to do, and it came out the best thing for you to do is to change. But then I checked again, asking the question, well, what's the best thing for him to do according to the benefit of sentient beings? And it said, he came out, the best thing for you, the best thing for sentient beings is for you not to change. So then he says, so if you're more concerned for yourself than sentient beings, then you can change. But if you're more concerned for sentient beings, then you'll stay as a monk. So I was like, oh my God, you know, so, I mean, rock in a hard place. So no, he told me that in person. He told me that in person. So then I felt, you know, really kind of depressed. I felt back on the hook. So I remember I walked out in the woods through the forest, the back of Tushita, sort of mulling all this over, you know, how was I going to do it, you know. And then he went into retreat, Rinpoche, and wasn't seeing anybody. So I couldn't go and see him again. But then I got a note from him, which I still have somewhere. And the note was, I understand you're going back to London. I thought you were going to stay for a few weeks and do a retreat. Okay, so I think this is where he said in the note, he said, you know, Lama appointed you the director of Wisdom Publications, so you need to keep doing that. So go back and try again, and if it's difficult, still difficult, go and see Geshe Wangchen and return like that. So then I thought, okay, well, so then I went back to London and I sort of tried weekly for you know, another month to keep it together. But then I went and saw Geshe Wangchen and apologized, but said this is too difficult. I can no longer keep these vows, so please accept my ordination. So if you do it like that, you're not breaking an individual liberation vow, I don't think. And if you do it like that, then later on you're able to take your ordination again. So I think you can do it. You can get ordained and disrobe twice, and then get ordained again for the third time. But that's it. So, but I never took it again. But I could, and so I think those are the rules. But causing someone to disrobe, breaking a vow. I remember there was a monk, a Tibetan monk and a Western nun who got together, had a sexual relationship, and they both blew their ordination. Anyway, it happens quite a lot, and I think it probably happens a lot, and people don't admit it, and so they carry on as if they're a monk or nun when they're really not. So I think that's a terrible deception also. Not to recognize what you've done, or not to admit even to yourself what you've done, and to show the world that you're still a monk when you're not. Or to make excuses, you know, that you're practicing highest yoga tantra, so you have a consort, so you can do this practice as a monk. You know, it's very rare, I think, that a monk is given permission to disrobe in order to take a physical consort to practice highest yoga tantra. I think there are very few stories. One story is that the 13th Dalai Lama gave permission to the previous incarnation of Serkong Dorji Chang, the Lama who was in Kathmandu. So there's Sansab Serkong Rinpoche and there's Serkong Dorji Chang. So two Serkong Rinpoches. So the one in Kathmandu, apparently his previous life, he was given permission by the 13th Dalai Lama to take a physical consort because he had those high realizations, but he had to disrobe in order to do that. Otherwise, you know, if you try to persuade a monk or a nun to have sex with you, you know, and most people who want to finish their ordination or break their ordination, it's usually around sex. It's not that somebody wants to kill somebody, or that they're lying about their spiritual realizations. I've realized emptiness, this or that. You know, it's usually sex, and that causes most people to disrobe or to break their ordination. So if you're a layperson and if you've taken bodhisattva vows and you persuade a monk or nun to have sex with you, then you're breaking this vow. You're causing an ordained person to disrobe. Or even if you say, look, let's get together, and why don't you disrobe and then we can live as a couple, then that's also breaking this vow. Sorry, I thought I was going to finish these today, but too many tangents. So is this okay? Is this whole thing taking too long? Is it too much rambling? Okay, write to me privately if you object. Okay, so thank you again for putting up with all this. And we started off generating bodhicitta. We've been discussing the precious bodhisattva vows, so we've created a lot of merit. So we want to dedicate that merit, because of this merit, may we quickly reach enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. And so that's our dedication. So then remembering the emptiness of, the motivation, the action, and the dedication, remembering it's the interdependence of it. None of it is self-existent. So that's the dedication, and we just formalize it with a couple of prayers. Thank you, Bob.
Saji perki jukshin ne tokra rirab dingjini degen padi sange jingdu mikte oagi drokun nam dagjing lacher pasho jetun lame kutse rapten ching nam katrin le choksha ge padang lo sang ten pedren me sasumgi droe munsel tak tu negyuchig idam guru ratna mandalakam niryatayomi. In that snow mountain encircled land, source of every benefit and joy, may Lord Tenzin Gyatso Chenrezig remain in life till samsara's end. Savior of the snowland teachings and transmigratory beings who extensively clarifies the path that unifies emptiness and compassion, to the lotus in the hand, Lord Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as a bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjana's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplishes magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Through this virtue may I swiftly, having gained Guru Buddha's state, place each and every sentient being without exception in that state. Precious supreme Bodhi mind, may where unborn arise and where born never decline but increase forevermore. Meet se wei ter chen chen rezik, dream kin pe wang po jang pel yang, gang chen ke pe tsu gen song ka pa, lo sang rang pe ja bla so wa de. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, everybody. Happy New Year, and see you next week.
Next week.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Nick.
Thanks.
Good night.
Thank you.